For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Shannon Derehove. Researcher and analyst Professor Raymond Suttner discusses the loss of trust in South Africa's leadership, resulting in ungovernability. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you.
Now, the violent scale of protests in South Africa recently has been blamed on the police's use of deadly force when other resources could be deployed to contain the situation. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's correct to criticize the readiness with which police have opened fire. We have this problem where if you go to the morgues or you go to the jails, the same people, the same section of the population who were the victims of apartheid repression are feeling the brunt of police action today. Africans are the majority of the population, but they're overrepresented amongst the dead, amongst the wounded, and so forth. And I think this tells us something very serious, that if you have a profile of someone who the police is targeting, that person is actually very similar to the person under apartheid. Now, I'm not suggesting, and I think Rampile was wrong when she said nothing has changed since apartheid. I'm not suggesting that nothing has changed, but there is this problem that the same people who are protesting and the same people who fall as a result of police action are those who were victims under apartheid. Some people say the police are not adequately trained. The minister says that they use world-class methods of police control and so forth. But the question for me is, why do these people, when they raise grievances, why is their first encounter with the institutional structures of the state the barrel of a gun? Should they not first have an encounter with those who should be dealing with their grievances? That is, the councillors, the provincial authorities, or the ministers. And the Gauteng Commissioner of Police complained about a week ago that they are being put in an impossible situation because they can't address these grievances. And they face people who are sometimes armed, and it leads to deaths and injuries.
Now, a different track of crime is corruption, where the electorate no longer trusts the government, when our President Jacob Zuma himself has evaded many, many cases of corruption. What do we do about this?
I think a situation has emerged in the period since 1994 where leadership has opened up opportunities to people in the ANC that were not there, or not there on the same scale as before. I think there was patronage. I think there was corruption in the period of illegality, but it was certainly not an opportunity on the scale that we now have it. When I worked inside the country, I was given some funds for some illegal activities, and I could have said, I've done X, Y, Z, the money is used up. And it would have been possible to get away with that because they often didn't publicize illegal activities. So there were opportunities for corruption, even in the underground here, and in exile. I think some people had the opportunity to access scholarships and divert these to some people and so forth. Now that would be patronage. Now in the period after 1994, you have a situation where there wasn't a very well developed black bourgeoisie or even middle class. And the access to funds which has developed black business has been substantially through access to the state. And people who hold office have been able to direct funds towards businesses that are friends of theirs, or where they themselves can ultimately become the beneficiary. So we've got to understand it as a sociological phenomenon that has opened up when there is this access to wealth. And how one regulates it, in my opinion, is by strengthening democratic institutions. Because if decisions are made in an untransparent manner, then it is easier for corruption and patronage to operate. Now, we have got we have got very good constitutional instruments for dealing with clean government, for ensuring clean government, but they have been undermined to a substantial extent. You've referred to the failure of the prosecution system with President Zuma, but you've also got other cases where the prosecution system has collapsed in cases, and the policing system has collapsed in cases where people ought to have seen a successful prosecution. For example, in the killing of Andries Tatane in front of television cameras, in many cases of rape or so-called corrective rape, where lesbian women have been raped. Many of these cases have not been pursued with the diligence that is required professionally by the police or the prosecution. You also have a situation where dockets are lost. In some parts of the country, if you are killed and you belong to an opposition party, it's very difficult to have a remedy because the way in which the policing and prosecution system have been packed by loyalists, I wouldn't say just of the ANC, but of a particular faction of the ANC, is undermining the constitutional rights of people in South Africa.
Now, the current protests that we see at the moment are reminiscent of the days under apartheid. What is the government doing to protect civilians as well as state property, and do you think it's enough?
See, I don't think that the government is in a position, the scale of the problem is so great and it's tied up with corruption. If you look at Carol Payton's article in yesterday's Business Day, she takes three areas, Madibeng, Bronkhorst-Spruit, and I've forgotten now what the third area was. And she's shown in each case that apart from the grievances of the ordinary people without water, electricity, and so forth, you have dissatisfied business people who believe that contracts have not gone to local people, and you have dissatisfied ANC people who were not put on ANC lists and things like this. So you've got to disentangle a whole lot of things, and it will take a long time to do this. And the problem that we as citizens have is that if we vote this year, will we see any remedy? And one of the problems that I have as an analyst is that I am not in a position to give an easy answer. I believe that we've got to start by analyzing the problem and understanding it in a way that a lot of us see this is the problem. Once you see the problem, you can start to remedying it. It's like a dentist. You can't say first extract, then x-ray. You first got to x-ray. Now, analysis is required before you have a remedy. And I'm still busy trying to understand it, and to convince other people of how to understand it. And I believe that a broad way of approaching this will be for us to build, as I've said before, a broad social movement of concerned citizens who agree on the need to have clean government, to respect the Constitution, and to build civil society institutions of a type that are responsive to ordinary people, but also help to realize constitutional gains.
Talking about elections now, many people do feel a sense of helplessness, that the elections are unlikely to produce significant change. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that is what I have tried to address now when I've said that people have a sense of despair. And I think the way one must, if you've got, for example, some headache, before you can remedy it, you've got to have it diagnosed. You can say now the problem is Zuma, let's get rid of Zuma.
But it's not necessarily that.
No, that's what I'm saying. The problem is that there are a whole lot of institutional relationships that have been created that undermine constitutional structures. Let's identify these. Some of these can be addressed by legal action, by strengthening our Section 9 institutions and other institutions of government. And if you look, for example, at the actions around the Traditional Courts Bill, you have rural women's voices going there to Parliament. And it's very hard for Parliament to ignore the fact that it is being rejected. So there's a number. So my first point is, do we have a common understanding of where the shoe is pinching? And once we have that, then we work on the remedies. I think we do have a broad idea, but we then have to work on how we build such a coalition.
And that hopefully will increase trust then in our leadership.
No. It will build a new leadership, is my opinion.
Right.
It will mean that if a new leadership comes, we have to have institutional structures that cannot be undermined.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
That was Professor Raymond Suttner discussing the loss of trust in South Africa's leadership.